So apparently Mark Carney winning the election wasn't enough. The further we get away from the election ever taking place, the more he's winning his seats. Apparently now he's like that much closer to a majority government. So yeah, that's kind of scary. And analysts are predicting that he will strategically have a majority government because all he needs is one NDP MP to cross the floor. So that is absolutely terrifying. And speaking of terrifying, this next piece, it could make or break how you form your opinion on this country and our politics. Mark Carney's also apparently super buddy with President Donald Trump. Yeah, elbows up was a lie. In fact, it's not that at all. They are very friendly, and President Trump has earth-shattering news that's going to be dropped in the next couple of days that involves Canada and America. Yeah, I mean, hey, it's good that our relationship with America is not bad, but that's not what people voted for. People voted for the end of the relationship with America as we know it. Good job, liberals. Elbows up. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video, everybody. Before we get into it, I do want to encourage y'all to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It does really help grow the channel. And I hope everybody had a phenomenal weekend this past weekend, and especially all the moms out there. Happy Mother's Day to all the moms. And without further ado, let's get right into this video. Starting off with the news that apparently liberals flip back a Quebec riding by one vote after a judicial recount. So that's kind of crazy. And we're going to have more on that later as well. Then speaking of crazy, you also have a story that just kind of writes itself. Air India, a flight departing from Toronto to Delhi, has been diverted due to clogged toilets. Kind of crazy that's a thing. And then you also have EB Games that is completely getting a new Canada reboot. Kind of interesting. EB Games was bought out by Canadian investors and they're rebranding it fully. Let's take a look.
Hey guys, welcome to EB Games.
It's game on again for EB Games after 4 years of operating as GameStop in Canada. The video game retailer is returning to its roots as part of an acquisition announced this week.
For 21 years, it has been the EB Games brand, and I think Canadians relate to it as their brand.
Leading the reboot is Quebec entrepreneur Stéphane Tetrault, the toy industry heavyweight behind Import Stragan and McFarlane Toys. He declined our interview request, but in a statement said his goal is to bring something back that Canadians truly loved. Writing, "We're going to build something special here, with community, nostalgia, and innovation at its heart." The rebrand comes less than 3 months after GameStop announced plans to sell its Canadian operations. And it's an opportunity to move away from some of the negativity surrounding GameStop's meme coin craze.
It may be game over for major retailer GameStop.
In early 2021, GameStop stock skyrocketed as thousands of everyday investors banded together online to drive up the price and squeeze Wall Street hedge funds betting against it. It cost big investors billions and raised big questions about market fairness. Now, the company is looking to ride the wave of patriotism growing in Canada, a move branding experts applaud with caution.
Some of the risks that brands face when they try to kind of go back and pull a bit of nostalgia or a bit of the old identity is making sure that they carry the stuff that actually was positive and built equity.
GameStop shuttered 1,000 stores worldwide last year, including 11 in this country. There's hope EB Games will preserve the in-store experience.
There is still, especially in video games, a level of enthusiasm around the physical product that you don't see in some of the other mediums. And I think that, a store like EB Games especially goes above and beyond to try to provide an experience beyond just purchasing a game.
The full rebrand of 185 Canadian stores, including 20 in BC, is expected to take 6 months. Online, EB Games is already live. The company taking one step back to move its legacy forward.
You also have Mark Carney, who's addressing Canada, saying we're going to build things that connect our country. So now he thinks that he's the Messiah, and liberal voters seem to think that he's the Messiah, and he will wave a magic wand and heal Canada.
We will remove federal barriers to internal trade by July 1st to help unleash the full potential of Canada. We will work with provinces, territories, and Indigenous groups to identify projects that are in the national interest, projects that will connect Canada, deepen our ties with the world, and grow our economy for generations. We'll make the Canadian government a catalyst for these projects, not an impediment.
I'd love to know what you guys think about that clip. And we have Donald Trump, who apparently is very fond of Prime Minister Carney. And I mean very fond. Not just because our previous Prime Minister he always referred to as Governor Trudeau, but it's quite the opposite relationship that he has with Prime Minister Carney than he did with Justin Trudeau. Here we go.
You know, I said before in our meeting with the new and very talented Prime Minister of Canada that we have some very big announcement to make. It's not about trade. It's about something else, but it's going to be a truly earth-shattering and positive development for this country and for the people of this country. And that'll take place sometime within the next few days.
Again, I'd like to pass the question off to you guys. How do you feel about this? Is this good for Canada? Is it bad for Canada? Do you think that Canadian Liberals were duped? Because, again, Mark Carney campaigned really hard on the fact that anti-Trump, anti-America, we need to forget about that relationship. We're breaking up with America and we're moving on to the fancy new girl, Europe. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Apparently, our relationship with America is going to be better than ever, which, again, that's good. Like, I don't want a bad relationship with America. I'm not just going to be against it for the sake of being against it. But he lied. He flat out lied. And that's the part that is hard to wrap my head around. But again, he's a liberal, and that's kind of what liberals do. But now let's take a look at Vashi from CTV, who talks about what this is going to look like with President Trump after their meeting.
What tangibly, in your view, came out of that meeting?
I think your introduction said it very well. It was a cordial, respectful, business-like tone, both in the public portion in the Oval Office and then at the working lunch that followed. It was probably 90 minutes, the working lunch. The conversation from our perspective was respectful and constructive. The Prime Minister raised, obviously, our concerns around the impact of tariffs, the damage that they're doing both to the Canadian and the American economy. And he, as he said, he and the President had conversations about other sort of geopolitical global issues. As you know, the Prime Minister's chairing the G7 leaders meeting in Kananaskis, Alberta, later in June. So this was an important step along the road to having Mr. Trump back in Alberta for the G7 a little over 4 or 5 weeks from now.
Did your government get any indication that those tariffs could be, not would be, but could be lifted completely? And I ask because in the White House and during the media spray, the president indicated the opposite. I looked to the deal agreed to and announced late in the week with the UK, in which some tariffs still remain. Some are reduced, but some do remain. Was there any indication given to your government at those meetings that the tariffs could ever completely be removed?
I would say that the Prime Minister obviously made the economic argument as to why, as I said, they're not helpful both to the American economy and the Canadian economy. But the President was consistent both privately and publicly in terms of not giving us an assurance right away that all of the tariffs would be lifted. What he did, I think, is listen carefully to what the Prime Minister offered in terms of economic and security partnerships that can be in the interest of both countries. And he agreed to continue the conversation and to work. Secretary Lutnick and I spoke the evening we got back to Ottawa on the Tuesday evening last week. When we landed in Ottawa, Howard had called me. We've spoken again subsequently later last week as well. So we have a process, I think, that will continue the conversation. I'm hopeful, Vashi, and we, as the Prime Minister has said, we will not stop working and accepting that the status quo of some version of these tariffs remain in place. We had a free trade agreement with the United States that President Trump had signed. So we will continue to put pressure on the American government until we get back to a respect of a free trade agreement that has worked well for decades. But I'm not naive. We have a lot of work to do to get back to that point. But we have a path forward, a starting point that was constructive. So we'll just continue to push over the next number of weeks.
Given the unpredictability of the president, I think a big part of your party's message during the campaign, and the prime minister's in particular, was that we have to look inward, right, to buttress our own economy so that we're not in the vulnerable state we have found ourselves in over the past few months. In particular, he talked about making Canada an energy superpower. What does that mean?
So that, Vashi, was also part of the conversation that I participated in when the prime minister convened the first ministers, the premiers, on a call Wednesday last week. So when we got back from Washington the next day, he reported to the premiers on the progress and the substance of our meetings. And the conversation very quickly turned between the prime minister and the premiers into exactly those issues. Having one Canadian economy, not 13, so removing the barriers to commerce and trade between provinces and territories. Also, national projects that are essential to making our economy competitive and more productive. It would include energy corridors. It would include access for Canadian energy products to different markets. So the Prime Minister, as you know, and Premier Moe have agreed to have an in-person First Ministers meeting the first week of June. So a lot of those conversations will take place at that meeting at the beginning of June. And we're going to continue to develop, in collaboration with the provinces and territories, that list of nationally significant projects that we will work on collaboratively with them.
When you reference getting Canadian energy, for example, in what you just talked about, to other markets, do you mean conventional energy? And to be specific, does this government intend to demarcate itself from the government under Justin Trudeau in its approach to oil and gas, to be blunt?
Well, I think the Prime Minister, both in the election campaign and his comments since, and as we know, he grew up in Alberta, went to high school in Edmonton. He knows the province of Alberta very well. He had a constructive conversation with both Premier Smith and Premier Moe. So we intend to be supportive of the Alberta economy, and our government recognizes the importance of conventional energy in terms of the economic prosperity of the country. We can do both. We can support a transition to less carbon-intensive forms of energy, but recognize that the world continues to need conventional oil and gas, and Canada should be a reliable, dependable supplier of those energy resources as well. So I'm confident that we have absolutely found the right balance, and I'm confident, recognizing, as I say, the Prime Minister's desire to convene the First Ministers in Saskatoon and work with Premier Moe. I've spoken to Premier Moe since the First Minister's meeting. I'm very confident that we can support every part of the country's economy in a way that will bring greater prosperity to the whole country. That was what we offered Canadians in the election, and we're at work doing that now.
Do you concede, though, that the sentiment in Alberta and Saskatchewan is that that was not the case over the last 10 years, and that there is a high level of concern that that could continue under a Mark Carney government because you have not, for example, backed off of an emissions cap for the oil and gas sector, or C-69, which the Supreme Court even called your government out on? Why are you sticking to those policies which that part of the country has felt greatly inhibited their economic success?
So again, the Prime Minister, I think, has Prime Minister Carney has taken a constructive and positive tone with respect to Western Canadian resources and their importance to the Canadian economy. He is in ongoing conversations with other First Ministers, including obviously the First Minister, the Premier of Alberta, the Premier of Saskatchewan, and others. Those conversations will happen over the next number of weeks. If he's convened them, as I said, in person in Saskatoon with Premier Moe, it's precisely to have those conversations and understand how the government of Canada can be a partner. The fact that he's saying that we should collaborate in terms of the review approval process for large projects with provinces, one project, one review, not duplicating work that's done by provinces. This is a significant departure from the previous government, and the Prime Minister has, I think, shown a great deal of understanding and openness to support the economy of these resource-intensive provinces.
With all respect, though, Minister, how is it a great departure? I mean, once again, tone is not action. And I think that's the point that the premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan have been making repeatedly over the last number of weeks. And the only actions that we've seen so far is that your government is standing by an emissions cap that the sector and those provinces say will be punitive in nature insofar as limiting the increases in production in that part of the country for oil and gas. And you're sticking by C-69, which they have essentially dubbed the No More Pipelines Act. Like, what action specifically will you take to address the concerns of a very important part of this country?
So you'll forgive me, Vashi, but actions, as we speak this morning, the election was less than 2 weeks ago. The new government hasn't been formed in terms of a swearing in of a new cabinet. Parliament will come back in a few weeks. There'll be a speech from the throne delivered by His Majesty the King. So you'll understand, and the First Minister's meeting has already been scheduled to happen in Saskatoon, co-hosted with Premier Moe. So I understand the question. I understand the concern of people across the country with respect to those issues. But the government is at work. The Prime Minister is very much conscious of those concerns. And we will be working through them with those provinces. But to say that we've landed on a final set of measures or that previous government's policies will not change in any way, I think is an oversimplification. The first cabinet meeting after Mr. Carney became Prime Minister, he got rid of the retail carbon tax. Pretty important in parts of the country like New Brunswick, where I come from. I think he's shown a willingness to evolve policies, but we have to let the government be sworn in, and we have to let the Prime Minister talk to the premiers over the next couple of weeks.
That's a totally fair point, except for the two policies that I highlighted, the emissions cap and C-69, are things that your party and the Prime Minister said during the campaign he would abide by, which is exactly why I selected them, which is also why you heard from the premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan, on those very policies. They have identified them as clear irritants, and during the campaign, your party said you would stick by them.
And again, I'm not surprised that different premiers from different political parties find policies of a Liberal government different than perhaps they would like. The important thing is that we can have respectful, productive conversations with those governments, which is exactly what we're doing. We're going to work on a whole number of areas where there's broad agreement between our government and those premiers, and continue to be a constructive partner. Mr. Carney has shown enormous openness, we think, to Western Canadians, to the provincial governments and territorial governments they've elected. That's the work that we're going to continue to do, and the final answer is far from defined.
So Dominic LeBlanc has a long history of dealing with President Trump in the United States, and he's doing what he does, I guess. He's continuing those negotiations with Trump, and it just seems so weird that 5 months ago, Trump hated all of these liberals, hated Dominic LeBlanc, hated Chrystia Freeland, hated Justin Trudeau. And the only person that's out of the mix is Justin Trudeau, but all of the other people are still there. And apparently it's thumbs up, not elbows up. Kind of weird. But now let's move on to our next clip where we're talking about Mark Carney's cabinet, because the cabinet that he picked was only temporary. He's only in the interim. Now that he's won the election, he has to come up with a whole new plan for a whole new cabinet. He could theoretically keep the same people in place, or he might shift them around. Let's take a look at that.
Now, the riding of Terrebonne has been flipped by the Liberals. How do you think the other recounts could impact the seat count?
I mean, I think the big thing is, are the Liberals going to somehow see that 172 magic number reached here? And it's a really interesting story in the election that so many ridings were so close. And a lot of them we were watching right down to the wee hours of the night, which I think really speaks to how competitive the election was and the strength of the two major parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives, and also the Bloc Québécois in Quebec, that it ended up being so close that there are so many recounts. But I think at this moment, when we're looking ahead to that cabinet, the presentation of the cabinet that's supposed to be happening on Tuesday, I think the big thing is, what will enough of these recounts go the Liberals' way that they hit that 172?
Is it possible that they will hit that number?
Possibly. I mean, I don't know that the recount will go the way it goes, right? Like it's not an agenda thing. It's the votes are the way they are, and they'll do the counts. And if it so happens that the Liberals hit the majority mark, well, that's the way it is. And if they don't, they don't. It's all fact based, right? There's no agenda. There's no push. It's just the votes are there or they're not. And so I think honestly, the Liberals minority is quite strong, right? Regardless if they add any more seats to the count or not. And so I don't think that there's a whole lot, I mean, everybody likes to have a majority. I don't know that there's a whole lot of stress on that side. I think they can certainly do what they want to do, whether they've got those any extra seats coming in for them or not extra, but if they see their numbers go up. I think that chances are Mark Carney plans to run the country as though he's got a majority, which prime ministers do. You have to fill the space that's there. You have to make these decisions. And the decisions before him in the time we're in are absolutely enormous. And so, the numbers are what they are. They'll deal with it.
Now, you did mention that Carney is set to unveil his cabinet picks. That's set to happen Tuesday. What are you expecting there?
Well, I think, honestly, the key is going to be Carney. He's the one that's really new, right? He's got some people who were on the ballot for the first time. People like Evan Solomon, for example, who perhaps he'll end up in cabinet. Somebody who is known to many people and clearly somebody who could be seen as a star candidate for Carney, that kind of thing. But honestly, Carney's in a very different situation than Trudeau was back in 2015 when he put together his first government. Trudeau was building up a party that had been reduced to 34 seats. And one of the ways he did it was to bring in all these big names, these big star candidates. And he had lots of room to do it because the party had so few MPs at the time. Carney's in a different situation. He came in kind of at the 11th hour. He was looking at a situation where he had very little time from when he became prime minister to when he was calling the next election. We're going to see, I think, we see a very similar team between Trudeau and Carney. The Conservatives will say, look, it's just Trudeau all over again. Yeah. I think, it'll be interesting to see who Carney brings in that's new. But for me, I'm more interested in the style of governance than I am in who he puts into the cabinet. It's always fun to speculate about who will be in cabinet. But what approach will he take? Will he have a priorities and planning committee? Will he do things in a more streamlined way? There's some speculation about his style of governance, but to me, that is going to be the key to see how he's going to go about the Trump issue, intergovernmental relations, everything else.
I'd love to know what you guys think about this discussion of his cabinet. I know a lot of people, obviously, watching this video are not fans of Mark Carney. Either am I. Do you think that this is going to have catastrophic disaster and an outcome with America and relationships? Or do you think that somehow miraculously and very mysteriously this is going to be good for Canada and America? Let me know your guys' thoughts down below. And then to kind of wrap up this video, we're going to talk about the fact that, well, Carney kind of has a majority government. Even though he doesn't have all the majority seats with the Liberals, it's not going to be that difficult, according to analysts, for him to actually have majority power like that instantly. So let's take a look at that.
Your reaction to the Liberals flipping Terrebonne first?
Well, this is kind of more of what we knew already, which is that the Liberals effectively have a working majority. They're right on a whisker away from having that actual technical majority. But, the bottom line is no matter how these vote recounts turn out, and, you could see some seats switch from the Liberal column into the Conservative as well, depending on how it goes in a couple of those Ontario ridings. Mm-hmm. We know that the Liberals won't have a majority government, a technical majority government at the end of this. The best they can do is be one seat shy. Although I do point out to people that they have to pick a speaker, and that takes one voting member of the House off the board. And chances are in a minority parliament, the government's going to permit that speaker to be an opposition member.
Who do you think that might be? I've heard rumor of Elizabeth May possibly doing that. Do you think they would try and get a Conservative in there?
The deputy speaker of the House of Commons, golly, his name is escaping me right now. I apologize. Chris Antermont, I think, from Atlantic Canada. I think is a popular choice. He's seen as a very stable hand and well experienced, so we could see that happen. Now, sometimes opposition parties will say, no, we want to keep the feet to the fire of the government. We are not going to give them a speaker. We're not going to lend them a vote or take a vote off the board. So there could be some parliamentary elbows flying at the end of the month when the House resumes.
And we've had the Bloc say, I've heard they're willing to prop them up for at least a year. Is that realistic?
Yeah, I think that it is. I mean, the Bloc's not going to be eager to go back into the wood chipper of an election after this result. They shed a ton of seats. And, you know, I think if you're Mark Carney, we've heard him be very direct on this. I mean, he was asked, you know, will you do a deal with the NDP or the Bloc? He just said, no. And then someone said, well, could you elaborate? And he goes, well, why would I? And I don't think it was arrogance. I think he was just making the point of, we've watched the result of a pact in the House of Commons over the course of the past 3 years, and it hurt Liberal popularity, to be blunt, although they were able to recover when they replaced their leader, and it really harmed the NDP's popularity. So with votes this close, you know, I think if you're Mark Carney, you can, with you know, a little care, pretty much preside over this parliament as though you have a majority, and you can feel relatively free that you can implement your agenda, particularly as you point out in this next year or so. And the NDP are in complete disarray. They're not going to want to pursue an election anytime soon.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the video. I'd love to know what you guys think down below in the comments. I personally just want Canada to do good. I want more homes to be built. I want less taxes. I want less safe supply. In fact, I want no safe supply. I just want to go back to life being normal. I want to go back to less hatred, less divisiveness, less toxicity with other countries and our own people. I just want life to be good in Canada. That's what we all want. So as we approach the end of the video, I want to just pass one final question off to you. Do you think that Mark Carney is actually capable of doing those things? Or do you think that we're going to be in a worse state as a country than what we were before Mark Carney came into power? Let me know what you guys think to that answer. That, ladies and gentlemen, concludes this video. As always, if you haven't yet already, I'd like to encourage you guys to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in another video later today. Bye for now.